Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another session of the How About Some Marketing webinar series. My name is Emmanuel Petrescu, founder of How About Some Marketing. I'm an SEO and digital marketing consultant from Toronto, and I can't be more privileged and happy to have a special guest today, Marta van Berkel. She's the CEO of Schema app and an authority on the topic. I've turned to her articles, presentations, and everything that she shared for the past couple of years many times, and I've applied successfully uh, in my um, in my work, and I've seen some results. So I suppose, Marta, on behalf of the entire SEO and digital marketing community, welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super jazzed to be here.
Excellent, excellent. We'll just give a few more minutes to give everyone a chance to join. It's the first webinar I host that's at noon. I'm um, I'm experimenting with a different format. The turnaround seems to be okay so far. If you, in the meantime, if you want to drop in the chat wherever you are joining us from and what is your job title and what do you do, I already seen some people putting in some comments, but anytime feel free to do that. And I was just looking to see where the audio is to play a background music, but it's already too late. Based on that, Andrew from LA, 9 a.m. 9 a.m. here. Hi, Andrew. Martha is joining us from Guelph, Ontario, Canada, student. Italy, we have somebody from Italy. Nice. Well,
Ciao.
excellent, excellent. Well, without further ado, thank you everyone so much. SEO specialist from Montreal, we have Amin, mutual friend. You both shared the stage a few weeks back at the SEO IRL and a former guest. Thank you so much, Jason from New York City, 12 p.m. on the same time zone. Excellent. I think we are ready to start. But before that, one thing that I wouldn't be much of a marketer if I wouldn't ask anyone who's here, if they're not already, go to howbossmarketing.com and subscribe to the newsletter, because that's where you'll find previous recordings, this current recording, and any other webinars that we're gonna put together for How Bossa Marketing. And essentially, what's How Bossa Marketing? It's a place for marketers to get better at their marketing. It started off from my own need of having a community that I want to turn to. You often get confused. That's where Marta helped and her articles I was mentioning yesterday. And uh, I've put this together, webinars, soon podcast, and many, many other things. Without further ado, I want to turn the virtual stage to Marta. I might I want to let you introduce yourself, Marta, if you want, and then just simply jump right into the presentation. And I just want to remind everyone that we have a chat. So if you have any questions, uh, pull, fill the information there. And Marta, do you want to address them at the end or as we go? I suppose it depends.
I've got the chat up, so put your questions in there. If it's relevant to what I'm talking about, I'm happy to jump in. And then if I miss any, Emmanuel, I'll make sure that we catch up at the end and sort of address any questions or comments that the team has.
And we do give a shout out to Kevin and Hassan, who are here on the backstage and who will be helping us monitor and we'll be putting the information on the screen, the questions that you have as you go. And my suggestion to everyone here is ask questions. This is this is a unique opportunity. I can't be more privileged. And with that, Marta, turning it over to you.
Amazing. Well, thanks for having me. Hopefully, you're enjoying your first morning coffee or your lunch and excited to learn more. As Emmanuel mentioned, I had the chance to speak at SEO IRL in Toronto. And I'll be sharing a little bit of what I shared there around sort of how do you own AI search and how do you learn about knowledge graphs? And don't worry if you don't know what that is, we'll go ahead and cover it. So hopefully you can see my slides. I'll get a thumbs up from Emmanuel that
Not
we're
yet, but now it should.
amazing. All right. So when I introduce myself, I use actually my knowledge graph to introduce myself. And a knowledge graph is how things are related, and specifically what the relationships are between those different things. So you can see on the bottom, I'm a rower. So I live here in Ontario in Canada. And so I go out in a single or a double rowing in the summer. It's just turned to fall here. So my rowing season has just come to an end. And I actually have a technical background. So I got the chance to attend MIT for strategy and innovation, but I also studied engineering here at Queen's University, also in Canada. I am the founder and CEO at Schema App. We're an enterprise schema markup solution. We build knowledge graphs for a living. That's what we do. But I actually spent 14 years at Cisco. And so I'm an alumni of Cisco, and was really fun while I was there as I got to be an entrepreneur. I got to start up some new things there and work with large enterprise and really understand the importance of agility and innovation. And so a lot of what I learned working at Cisco is what we apply at Schema App. I am Canadian, and I used to drive a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. So this is a picture of my actual car. I used to bomb down the streets of Toronto. And my actual car was in the movie called Losing Chase that Kevin Bacon directed. Now, in North America, we have this game called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, that when you meet someone, you can kind of figure out your 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. And so, good news for those of you that play the game, you can now win because I am 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon. My car, and then Kevin Bacon used to drive my car when he was filming the movie. And I love this example of inferencing. So when you can figure out that you're going to win the Kevin Bacon game, you're actually doing that same type of inferencing that search engines or AI does when it actually reads the context of your schema markup that's on your website. So today I'm going to introduce and kind of revisit schema markup, which is the language of search engines, which is what I've used to describe who I am here, to help you also understand sort of how you can use this in this new kind of realm of search, whether you call that AI search or sort of like with the emergence of AI platforms. And so I always like to start with like, who does schema markup today? So maybe in the chat, I know, Emmanuel, that's something that you've done. There is actually a certification. So someone's asked about training. If you want to know more about training, we actually have free training on our website. So training.schemaapp.com. It actually introduces you to Schema Markup 101. It'll also introduce you to knowledge graphs. So if you want to learn more, you can go learn about that. So great question there. So schema markup's been around for a long time. It's not new, and it's data that goes sort of behind the website in order to explain what it's about. And it really is sort of, putting it in a structured format. And historically, people used to only think of it as driving rich results, so getting kind of visual changes in search. But now I really see it as this bridge between sort of your brand and AI understanding. So I'm going to share how you can do it today. I'm also going to share sort of some news from the market that don't just take my word for it, but sort of let's see sort of what the big sort of owners of search, Microsoft, ChatGPT, and Google are saying about it. Now, I want to kind of take you on a bit of a journey because, schema markup's like my world. This is what we do every day, all day. And, in 2023, there was big changes when they took away some of the rich results. So FAQ and how to, we remember that very clearly. But kind of starting this kind of February, we started seeing them starting to talk about structured data again. And it was really interesting because this is, of course, following sort of a year of ChatGPT sort of being introduced, and consumers starting to kind of search differently. And so in February, AI chatbots drive higher quality traffic than Google, right? So we saw sort of people and higher engagement sort of from people who coming there. And then in March, we started seeing sort of, I'll say, general kind of commentary from John Mueller and other spokespeople saying, yes, like we're using schema markup for generative AI. Or in Fabrice Canal was talking about like how it's helping them with LLM understanding, but there wasn't anything like hard documented yet, right? This was sort of showing up at conferences. John Mueller then started talking about structured data improving targeting. And then finally in May, there was official announcements around Google and Microsoft saying that structured data helps specifically with their AI experiences. And Google actually put it on their document of like how to perform in sort of their AI experiences. Again, they didn't talk about AI overviews specifically, or talk about sort of AI mode, but just like AI experiences. And they were saying like do structured data, like it'll help you actually show up. We then saw Bing start to talk more about structured data, mostly in the context of Index Now. So, those of you that don't know, Index Now is sort of where you sort of notify, it's a conglomerate, it's an open project to say, like, hey, this page has changed. So, they're saying now we don't know just what has changed or what pages have changed, but what on the page has changed. And this, of course, I like to think about it as like around sort of allowing search engines to be smarter about their crawl budget. Everything's about dollars, right? It's just even more expensive now with AI. So again, like how do we sort of inform them sort of what information on our websites are new? Now, I always love to kind of bring in sort of the latest information. So, just last week, October 23rd in Dubai, Google hosted their Google Search Central Live. And one of the slides was about structured data. Oh, by the way, if you hear me use the word schema markup and structured data interchangeably, in the SEO world, those mean the same thing. So, structured data can mean other things like putting in tables, but in this context, I'm going to talk about it in sort of the context of search. And so what they talked about was they reiterated not just that it's important, but structured data is critical for modern search features. They talk about sort of, like you can kind of find different ways and types to do it. Again, Schema Apta has a lot of, but the last part was new. They talked about structured data being efficient, easy for computers and machines to understand, and help them be very precise. Good for AI systems. Now, I've been talking about this forever because to me, it makes so much sense. Again, it gives you more accurate answers. It allows them to kind of, be more efficient as they're crawling to kind of get the information they need. And Google's now sort of documented it. So if ever you are in doubt, if you're like, Martha, I don't do schema markup, I don't do structured data, I don't think it's relevant. Well, good news, lots of evidence that it does. Oh, how do I check and verify the schema markup on my website? Good question, Kevin. So there's like different ways you can audit it. Often a lot of like SEMrush and other tools will tell you if you have it, but the easiest way is to just use the schema markup validator. So that's like probably my favorite tool. So if you go to schema.org, which is actually the vocabulary that describes everything, they have a validator and it will tell you sort of if it's there on that page. Often if you're checking a large site, I would look at like one or two pages for every page type. And then typically you can start to see what it is. Again, if you're an enterprise customer and you're looking to do it at scale, my team would do that for you as part of our sales process. But again, the validator is a great tool in order for you to do that. Google Search Console will also tell you if you have rich result eligible pages, but sometimes those won't show no all the schema markup on it because it's just looking at things that are rich results. All right, I always like to ground us on like who's dominating search? Like who do we care about? Who do we need to listen to at this point? And everyone has been talking a lot about ChatGPT and because that's like the emerging technologies. And yes, ChatGPT is leading in sort of the AI kind of market and the AI platform market. But Google is still dominating in search. And in fact, there's some latest research I was just looking at from Ahrefs where they were looking at 40,000 websites to look at sort of where traffic is coming from. And traffic is also still primarily coming from Google. And I'm talking not just like a little bit more, but a lot more, like 40% of traffic on websites versus like 2% or 1% coming from ChatGPT. And you can verify that on your own site. I know sort of the organizations I work with are seeing very similar, like under 5% of traffic is still coming from AI. Now, how does structured data implement these AI features? And so I have some research I like to share that sort of talks about like, well, what is like the measurable impact that we get? So this is some newer research that I'm citing from Relixer. It's from July this year, where they looked at sort of no schema compared to different types of schema. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about schema being connected and kind of creating a knowledge graph, but you can see sort of they're actually seeing the citation rate increase. And this was specifically in AI mode, different from AIO. Now, when we talk at Schema App about structured data, we're thinking of like the big picture about how it has an impact on your organization. And Schema markup, if you think about optimizing a page, think of that as this foundational layer at the bottom. So this is when you're sort of translating or putting like, this page is about a product, or if you're a hospital, maybe you're talking about it being a hospital, or you're talking about the authors on your website, the people that are writing. So this is sort of, just basic markup on a page. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the connectedness, because you saw in my introductory slide how when I connected and defined the relationships between me, my car, and Kevin Bacon, that you're able to do that inferencing. And so the reason I believe why Google and Microsoft and everyone's talking about the importance of schema markup and building, I'll say robust and healthy schema markup is because it can do that inferencing. And that comes from doing this thing called entity linking. Don't worry if you don't know what it is. I'm going to explain it to you today. When we do this entity linking, this connectedness between the content on our sites, and we bring that context, we're actually building a content knowledge graph. And that's really, think of my introductory slide, but for all the content on your website. And when we elevate to this sort of like, I'll say more robust data layer, or more robust data that's coming through our structured data, we unlock different rooms. So I call this the value house. We unlock different values. So SEO is sort of the one that we know very well. It's the one I've just talked about, sort of rich results, non-branded queries, AI overview citations. We're seeing those increase when we do really good schema markup. But there's actually other areas you can unlock as well. One is around content insights. So, right now people will talk about, you need to have topic authority or depth of content. Good news, like there's actually ways that you can use your schema markup to tell you about that. I'm not going to focus today's talk specifically on that piece, but it's, I would say, like an emerging area. And if you want to learn more, we have tons of content to read on our website under resources. The last area, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this as I'll say, like evidence from market that we're seeing, that is around reuse of your schema markup or your knowledge graph to help AI. And so at the end of today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the agentic web. I'm going to talk about sort of, how Microsoft is talking about them using structured data, this SEO tactic or this SEO strategy that we've been working on to help them prepare your site for agents. So that's what we'll talk about today. But I want us to really think broader, especially if you're talking to leadership within your organization. We're getting a lot of questions on like, what are we doing to prepare, for AI, or what are we doing to prepare for agents? And really good news, like the work you're doing in SEO is actually setting you up perfectly for that. So let's talk a little bit about like, what does that look like? And I'm going to give you some tactical pieces around like, the Kevin asked the great question of like, am I doing schema markup? What I want to give you today are some examples of, am I doing good schema markup? Because I really think there's a differentiator. There's a piece of content I'll share in here of research of saying, like having basic schema markup isn't actually going to deliver the results that you need in this new AI place. And so these advanced schema markup practices are going to help you go from basic to advanced and really help you prepare for this new age of search. Everyone good? Everyone with me? Okay. So the first one I want to talk about is depth and breadth. So we want to kind of think about kind of optimizing, and why this is important is because um, if you think about, again, my intro slide about like connecting the dots, like your website is very similar, right? Like we're trying to connect the dots between all the content on your site. And so it's not just about like who you are as an organization or the products and services you sell, but like the people within your organization, the amazing content, the case studies, all of these tell a story and answer, your consumer or sort of your prospects questions. And so we want to make sure that you're telling that whole story. And so historically people thought about schema markup just for getting rich results, again, stars, price in the search. It's much more about that, because if it's about understanding, we need to explain all the pieces so that we can answer those, especially long tail, very specific questions that are coming out of AI. The second piece is around depth, and I'll show you an example here. But depth is around, again, like we used to sort of do the minimum, right? So on a website, I would see if you're using maybe a Yoast plugin, it would say, oh, it's a blog, and the blog has this title and it has this author and it was published on this date. And maybe it's like, this is all the blog content, but there's a lot more context to it. Like, well, what's the blog actually about? What is the blog mentioning? And so the schema.org vocabulary was was actually created in order to describe all of these things. And I really encourage you, if you're maybe you're a general marketer and you do SEO as part of that job, go to the schema.org website. Schema.org has been around since 2011, and it basically defines all the things that Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Yandex at the time wanted to know about the topics. And it's a living, breathing project about what they want to know. And so my whole point is like, do you think they would have been this detailed? They would have put in this much work to give you the language, the vocabulary to describe the pages if they just wanted you to describe, one or two things on the page? I think the answer is no. And I think, as I talk about sort of where we're going with agents, you're going to see some examples of like why that's important. So I want to give you an example. It's like nice to talk in concept, but like let's actually apply it to a page. So I'm going to actually use the Schema App Solutions page. So this is where we describe what we do. And we are a software application. So we would first go and say, okay, we're going to describe this page. And it's ask the philosophical question. What is this page about? Right? It is not a web page. I'm sorry, but web page markup is actually good if you want to get sort of the favicon, like that's still a good reason to put web page markup. But like these are bots that are answering advanced questions for us, right? So what is this page about? Now, if you can't give an answer on what the page is about, it's also maybe like, oh, is the page specific enough, right? Because like maybe I need to be more specific about what it is. So in this case, like we're talking about our software application. This is what this page is about. And so we go to schema.org and we say, okay, what are the things then that I can use? The properties. So the type is software application. What are the properties I'm going to then use to fully describe what's on the page? And it won't always like be everything, but you can see on this page, like I'm going to describe, the creator of our software application is Schema App. It's got a name. It has a description. There's an example of how it works through our video. We have a review from one of our customers. And then we also have an FAQ, and the FAQ is this, the page is the subject of that FAQ. So you can see I'm connecting all the dots. I'm connecting to our homepage, which is actually where our organization is described. I'm connecting to the FAQs, making sure that that's not on an island. Everything is in context. So just again, like I introduced myself, I was describing, if I just talked about the Kevin Bacon game, you wouldn't know that you can win it because you know me. Again, we're trying to build context between all the things that have to do with your company so that when people ask questions, they can get the right answer. Now, these also drive rich results. Okay. So there's some things on that page. If I had a price, that would be something that I can do with rich results. All right, Emmanuel, are we going to do an ad?
Sorry, my apologies. I didn't know it. I thought it was getting backstage. Sorry. Think about did not happen.
That's all right.
That
We'll
did
go
not happen.
back. All right. So schema markup drives rich results. So just with the depth and breadth, like you still want to try to make sure that you're getting a rich result. Rich results are found on Google's website. So there's a page that describes all of the different rich results. They are evolving. In fact, there was an announcement this week that like some of the less used rich results, so dataset was one of them, book was another one, they're going to retire, but there's still lots around jobs, events, products, recipes, software applications. So there's lots of different, there's about 42 different ones. We are still seeing these drive higher click-through rates. So I would say like these are like low-hanging fruit to drive results to your site. Now they might also inform you to add things to your site. So let's say you have a product page, but you don't put a price, but your team is thinking about maybe putting a starting price or a price range. Those can actually drive higher click-through rate. And I've been sitting in quarterly business reviews with our clients, and they're still driving higher click-through rate. And I think in a world where clicks are disappearing because of AIO and because of AI chat, this is a great sort of, easy win within your organization. Now, how do I go beyond rich results though and stay on this topic of inferencing? And so I want to talk a little bit about building that content knowledge graph, kind of going from just like depth and breadth, sort of explaining what things are about, to really unlocking these other areas of value. So let's first start talking about like what is a content knowledge graph. So knowledge graph, you'll see people talking about it a bit more. It's in the area of semantic technology, and it really is where you're defining defining relationships between entities or things using a standard vocabulary. So in this example, we're using the schema.org vocabulary as that standard vocabulary. And when you do this, there's tons of research that, knowledge can be gained from inferencing. And this is, I think, sometimes helpful to kind of see it a visual. Like if you were to look at, this is one of our customers' websites, when you connect all the dots, all of a sudden it's this network. And it kind of looks like our brain, right? Like when we think of like our network of our brain, there's all these pathways, all these ways that things are connected. And it is those relationships that unlock that value. Now, it's not just me talking about knowledge graphs. Gartner also has done research saying that knowledge graphs are on the rise. As we look at sort of this next hype cycle of artificial intelligence, that knowledge graphs are a technology that we want to look at. In fact, one of my favorite pieces of research from 2024 was sort of a bullseye, and it was saying like in the year of 2024, Gen AI and knowledge graphs were sort of the key research that you should look at. So one of the things that we do is like, how do we do this then, right? Like we're talking about schema markup today. Well, we need to connect entities on your site, in order to elevate from just doing depth on a page, right? Breadth, getting coverage of the different pages. But now we need to do this connectedness. This is where we sort of unlock all this value. And so let's start with an entity. So an entity is a bit of a weird word, right? So think of it as a thing and you're describing it like with detail. So those properties that we just talked about in the schema.org vocabulary, whether it be price or color or parent organization, it's sort of, I like thinking of it as taking it from like a one-dimensional word into kind of a three-dimensional word. And so, the importance of this is like I sometimes describe my shoe. Now, if I were to tell you, like, I have this favorite shoe and my shoe is amazing, I'd be like, okay, Martha, like, great, you have a shoe. That's very exciting. But if I tell you I have like a hot pink, sparkly high heel, that's my favorite shoe. All of a sudden, you have a totally different understanding of what my shoe is. And so that's sort of what we're thinking of doing with entities. Like, we're using schema markup to add the hot pink, to add the sparkly, so that there's like a much deeper understanding, a much more contextual understanding. And here the example is like if you say the word apple, like how do we also kind of give the understanding that I'm not talking about the fruit apple, but I'm talking about the company Apple. And so schema markup is really this language to describe and define entities or things on your website. And so, when we think about entity linking, now we're not just describing it, but we're actually connecting. So we're not just wanting to describe it, but we also want to connect it. And when we do this, again, we're having this really high quality descriptive knowledge graph. And then it also provides understanding and clarity for AI. And this is, I think, why Microsoft and Google, when I started off, keep saying, do this, right? And that's why, again, Google kind of adding like AI systems like it, right? It helps them understand this is why, because we're really being deliberate about those connections. So there's two types of entity linking. External entity linking. So this has been something I've talked around for a long time. You might hear other sort of thought leaders talk about it. And this is where we're sort of clarifying something using external data sources. So whether that's Google Knowledge Graph, Wikidata, Wikipedia, Wikidata, think of that as the kind of non-language dependent version of Wikipedia. Elon Musk just announced Grokpedia, so that might be another kind of way that you can disambiguate or clarify things. And so again, here we're just trying to say, like on our page, we mention knowledge graphs. Why? Because we're a knowledge graph company. And so we're saying, like, what do we mean by knowledge graph? We mean these specific definitions. So you can do this for, again, I wouldn't say like you want to put like 100 things on your page, like through external definitions, but like, what are the main things, right? So just like when you're planning your content, what are the main topics or things I want to talk about? You want to make sure you're being clear in your schema markup and you're being clear on the relationship. So about is a really strong relationship. Like this page is about this thing. This page is mentioning this, or you might be defining, other relationships depending on sort of how it's defined. Now, the relationships might also be internal references. So, in the SEO world, we know this as interlinking or backlinking, like within our websites. What if we can do that with context, right? So we're still in this case now pointing to that location. So you can see my @ID in my schema markup is saying, hey, this page, the highlighter is defined over here, but I'm also describing the relationship. So in this case, I'm talking about how the Schema app solution has a part, like an element of it is our Schema app highlighter. And hey, machine, go over to this webpage to learn about that software application with more detail. Go find out about that entity on that other page. And so we are seeing sort of internal and external entity linking having an impact on results. And I'll give you an example right there. But this is sort of how we move from this old world of rich results to this new world of building a data layer or building a content knowledge graph. We have seen in research, so Bright Edge did this great research earlier this year saying that, when they did entity-based SEO and they made these connections, it was 3 times more likely to be cited in AIO or AI overviews and AI responses. And so let's see like what that looks like on your website. Because I do find like it's great. Martha's talking about like the software application page, but like again, now we're connecting the dots, not just on a page, but excuse me, across the whole website. So in this example, you can see I'm describing the page that's talking about my software application, but I'm also defining a relationship saying, go to my homepage, right? Which is where my organization's described, right? And if I was Apple, I might describe it with that same as that external entity linking there. I'm also saying that, hey, this page over here talks about my service output. So go look at that page in order to learn more about my service output. Or my example work, it's actually described in this video. But by the way, the video also has schema markup describing the video, right? That entity. And then I'm also kind of saying my software application has an offer. All right, great question. Can external entity relationships be faked? Can someone effectively create fake connections to make famous person doing the virtual name drop? I wouldn't say like you can just like authority, I would say like this is sort of just another way of adding authority. I think just like keyword stuffing, people can overdo it. But I don't know if you can like fake relationships. So it's sort of like it should still be like within like your owned content as to what you're describing. I don't think like unless like that content is an authority, I don't think really like having more links is going to make it sort of like be a different authority. That would be my answer on that. So I would say like just like keyword stuffing, don't overdo it. Um, Google has everything like the schema markup has to show what's on your website. And so you have to make sure that your content reflects that. So often when we're talking about this, like someone wants to be more, we work with a lot of hospitals. So a lot of, they're like, we want to be an authority on this type of surgery within cardiology. And we're like, great, like where are your pages talking about that? Because we would, and so and then it's like, oh, well, we don't have pages talking about that. Well, great, like it starts with the content, right? And actually like entity linking, we actually report on sort of what entities show up on what pages to help give data to teams to have those conversations with the content teams. So if you want to be a topic authority, like it starts with your content. So I would say like that's sort of how this can inform. Like if you want to make a connection to an internal page that's talking about maybe a pillar page, we would talk about it in marketing, that talks about a specific topic. That's like the expert page on this. If you don't have that, that's a great opportunity then to kind of go to the content team or to get that page created. Um, I mentioned this as having an impact. So we are seeing that when we are deliberate about, adding entity linking within the schema markup, we are seeing it have an increase in clicks, in kind of, I'll say search performance for things related to that entity. And this makes sense, right? Like if we're thinking about non-branded traffic and we're being very clear about how its authorities on certain topics, when Google's trying to figure out like what's the best page to talk about that topic and it's tied to an authoritative brand, it would make sense that if they can understand it better, that it would then sort of drive results. And we are seeing this. This is Brightview Senior Living, which is in the senior care area. We've also seen it working across, healthcare, tech, all different types of content. And so your content knowledge graph, what we just talked about that we're building with Schema Markup, right, which is this SEO tactic and tool, is this data layer. And I wanted to kind of switch gears and talk about like how it's important to manage it, because most people really think about how, like, I'm going to do Schema Markup, I'm going to turn on the plugin, I'm going to hope it just works, and then I'm not going to revisit it. But if this becomes the data, like what we're putting into the machines in order to drive visibility, and we know that consumers and searchers are changing their behavior to look more this way, like we need to be managing it. And so, some of you are asking, like, well, how do I think of my strategy? Like, what should I optimize and with what Schema Markup? That's that top step one. So, good news, get started there. Like, what is this thing? What should I optimize it on? Then you have to actually create the Schema Markup. So, whether that be with a plugin, an enterprise solution like Schema app, or you're manually doing it if you're working on sort of maybe a smaller site, you have to author it. The markup then has to be on the website, so they have to crawl it in order to kind of consume it, and then you can manage it, right? So that's sort of like adding things like entities, like adding external entities, internal entities. And then as your content changes, you're also going to need to manage it, right? So again, Schema App's a dynamic solution, but perhaps you're working on a plugin. Like you need to go check to make sure that it's like optimizing like the next things that coming out. Because again, it's that connected story, right? Across your content that we really want to make sure is optimized. And then the last piece is around measurement. And I love measurement because measurement's changing, right? Historically, we would look primarily at rich results and higher click-through rates. And now we look at sort of like as we deploy it, are we seeing it change for certain query groups or keyword groups? You can also look at, whether it's you're getting more traffic, referral traffic from different sources. And then my favorite one that I think all businesses should use as the ultimate measure is conversions, right? So what does a conversion look like to you, and how is it sort of impacting your business results? And this is sort of, I think, ties to solving one of the biggest problems that a lot of large organizations, again, who we work with, is saying like, they want to do AI, but they don't have the data to do it. Well, good news. If you do a really good job of your schema markup, you're actually building, a content knowledge graph, or like think of it as a marketing data layer in order to prepare that data for AI. So before I jump into talking about how agents could be using this, Emmanuel, over to you.
Well, speaking of entities and how they're connected to one another, you manage a team, correct?
I do, yes.
You've probably seen that some teams, and probably yours, just click and other clashes. Do you know what makes the difference?
Oh, I'm starting to learn a lot of it relies on trust, but it sounds like you have someone who knows about this topic.
Yes, my next guest, and I'm privileged to have Dawn Frel. She's a leading coach and executive at the TINA Executive Education, and she's been helping leaders develop strong communication and accountability collaborations with their team. She'll be joining us live on Monday, November 17, 2025 at 7 p.m. Eastern. So not the same time at noon, but at 7 p.m. Eastern to do a webinar on the topic of the secret sauce for team success. And that being said, the end of the commercial break, back to you, but I think it's me who needs to put this on. I always under the impression that
What
it does it
what a
automatically.
great topic. I actually love that topic, so I'll be tuning in. So I just talked a little bit about like data layers and how does that unlock? And I want to kind of now step back out to the 10,000-foot sort of market view of the world. And so in 2001, Tim Berners-Lee, Aurel Lasala, and James Hendler wrote a pretty famous article called The Semantic Web in Scientific America. And if you haven't read it, I really highly recommend going and reading it. It is lengthy, but it talks about exactly what's happening right now. And, they talked about the definition of the semantic web, about machines understanding, right? Like semantic documents, like semantics all about like the context of things, and able to then do sophisticated tasks. And so when we talk about now agents or the agentic web, it's really, machines taking now that they have understanding and moving next to execute on different things. And so what's really interesting is like what they pontificated back in 2001 is actually happening right now. And I think what's interesting is like I'd love to say like the agentic web, like that's a future thing, Emmanuel. Like let's talk about that in 2035. But it's actually happening, right now. And we'll see ChatGPT, and then I'll talk a little bit about Atlas that was just announced. Like they're creating partnerships, building integrations so that you can literally have a conversation and make purchases. And, at some point, like I look forward to, because there's things like I've run out of my protein powder. Like, could you just go to well.ca and order the protein powder? The one I love, like I've ordered it a million times. It has all that details out of my email and it just goes and get it done. And I think, what's interesting is that when Microsoft presented, so Krishna Madhavan, who's the senior product leader for Bing, when he was talking about how to plan for AI search and agents, he talks about, using structure and using structured data in order to help machines understand. And there's actually a great article, Emmanuel. I'll dig it up if you haven't seen it, but they actually produced it on the ad part of Microsoft, where he actually talks about, how to prepare for AI. And he talks actually a lot about what he was talking about here. And it's not just about structured data. He talks about, using headlines in your content, making sure you don't have hidden content on the site. So like don't, hide things behind a click. This is all basic SEO. This is like technical SEO 101. Well, good news, it's going to help with AI and agents. So all the work you've been doing, but it's a great article in order to kind of give you further evidence. But structured data plays a role here. And what's interesting about Microsoft is that same week, remember I started my presentation talking about how there was a week in May where there was like all this confirmation from Google and Microsoft about using structured data for AI experiences. Well, that same week, they also made an announcement about a project called NL Web. Now, NL Web is led by RV Guha. Well, RV Guha is the creator of RSS, and he's also led the collaboration work to build schema.org, the vocabulary that we're using in order to do structured data. And, schema.org and structured data was always built to be semantic and building these relationships. If you look at the vocabulary, it's built like that. And what's really fun is they reached out to us about a month ago and asked if we would actually collaborate with them because NL Web is actually dependent on structured data. Why? Because it helps them reduce hallucinations. They're going to use it in order to inform vector databases, and then their vision for NL Web is to be this agentic endpoint. So I talked about how, the agentic web is these bots going and doing tasks for us. And so Microsoft is working on this open project called NL Web to have a way, a standard way that we can actually put something on our website and make it ready for agents. And what's super cool is that they've already built integrations with it, with Atlas, which is the new the Chrome competitor coming out of OpenAI, again, making it easy for us to all play ball, right? In this kind of very fast evolving work. And so the work that like you're maybe learning today, and hopefully the action items you're taking in order to kind of get your structured data to be more than just explaining a page, but bringing context, is actually preparing you for agents. And the other play I wanted to just talk about is like there's also a lot of talk about model context protocol. And I put this in here more about just like get yourself educated about it because this is actually like an API for agents. So think of it as sort of a way for people to interact. At Schema App, again, we have an MCP connector. So people who do schema markup with us in an enterprise can use it to connect to their Copilot, connect to their chatbot. But we should be thinking in this way, like how are we going to make sure that our data that we're producing for search and for AI, building a marketing data layer is really ready to be consumed by whomever is going to be that new consumer, right? Whether that be agents, whether that be ChatGPT, whether that be sort of Google's next Google mode. And so that's really what I prepared to share with you today. We have a ton of content at Schema App, so if this is interesting you, Emmanuel, thanks for sharing that you use those resources. There's one here around mastering AI search, essential strategies and insights, but there's a ton of Ton of research. Again, the training.schemapp.com is a good place to start if this is new to you, or if you want to read sort of how it's moving the needle, like evidence of sort of how it's driving clicks, conversions. We also have that all there.
Thank you so much. I'm going to leave this slide on the screen. Maybe let's see if I can make it just a little bit smaller. I'm pretty sure I can, but I don't have one predefined. Okay. No, that didn't change a lot. To be honest, I'm going to leave it like this so people can scan and
No worries.
take yours before we dive into the question. And by the way, please add them there. I like to give my review and my 2 cents, unsolicited 2 cents about what was discussed. I'm pretty confident now that it was you who give the definition that schema is data about data. I don't remember
Oh yeah,
exactly,
that's funny. Yeah.
but I'm pretty sure I've heard it from one of those webinars that is from you. Now, I did take a lot of notes, which I'll encourage everyone to take, and lots of great information out there. One thing I struggle with is I have a friend, and maybe you know that friend. His name is ChatGPT, and he's good at everything apparently. And if I ask him to build me some schema, even though he doesn't know, what business it is or what the business is all about, he's gonna
Yeah.
go ahead and build it. And the first part of the question is no schema better than the wrong schema?
Mm,
And
I don't
maybe
know. Like I think like you have to make sure your schema describes the content. Like that's been around. I've been doing this for a decade. And I would say like ChatGPT is like you should still be looking at it and like is it describing the things that you want? Especially for people on WordPress, like I would say like general schema's better than nothing. Like if you're at least describing what it is. But I think like now more than ever there's a need for us to think in more advanced ways. And um Emmanuel, people don't do the harder way to do it the way we do it at Schema because it's hard and it's hard to maintain. I think that like speaks a little bit to Alex Meng's question, right? Like it's not something that you can kind of just like do once and then if your content changes, the website changes, like you have to maintain it. Like that's why my third tip isn't just like just don't do the work. Like you have to be thinking of this as a process, just like check on the health of your website, other web vitals, like you need to maintain it. And it's something called schema drift, so it's like where you would actually build the schema but not necessarily like maintain it or have it like reflect what's on the page. And that's why sort of like having it as it's like, oh, I'm going to go do it in ChatGPT and I'm going to cut and paste it on the web page isn't the best way to build it. Like it should be dynamic with your content if that content's changing.
yeah, and that kind of like addresses Alex's
Yeah.
question for sure. Is there a better non-linear way is there a better
Yeah. Like
non-linear way to organize?
yeah, and I like the other question, Alex, I kind of go to is like, will schema exist without the website? Right? Like that's something we have sort of debates on. And I think the answer is no. Like it's still based on content, right? Like we're still sort of trying to answer questions for humans. Like Marie Haynes, who presented also at SEO IRL, is like the human is still at the center of the experience. And so again, like what we're trying to do is still answer the questions for the humans. And then, those still need containers on where they exist. We just now need to think of like a new consumer. Like it's not just about the humans. Like we need to think about the machines now more than ever. And before that used to just be search. Now that's now that's also AI. I have an old t-shirt, one of our very first t-shirts at Schema App. It actually even has our old logo on it. And on the back it says I speak to machines. And I think that one's probably needs to come back, has to come back on the way back machine because it's more relevant than ever.
And before moving to the next questions, to address your point and kind of like to what Kevin asked earlier about being able to impersonate, I know that, and you mentioned that some of the large organizations actually don't do these things like the schema because it's hard and because they're not aware. So, but they dominate kind of like the search. So this is an opportunity for smaller organizations to win on this on the
Yeah.
search.
Yeah, where I've seen it really fun. We also work with, I would call challenger brands or like smaller organizations that are trying to stand out against some of the big brands. And yeah, it's absolutely a differentiator. And if you can do it well, if you can actually do, the connectedness that I shared about, like the external and internal entity linking, we're seeing it move the needle. Like you saw, Brightview Senior Living saw 25% increase in clicks, right? And with this world changing, I would say like rich results, table stakes, like get those done at the very least. And Mech, your question around like rich results are one, like maybe you don't have all the content on the page. We'll use that to inform your content strategy. Then we need to get that on the page because that's going to drive a higher click-through rate. Or, again, you can use the schema.org vocabulary to inform content. So content and SEO more than ever need to be working really, really tightly together because, again, these things work together.
And I do feel like cautioning again about asking ChatGPT. Sometimes it invents attributes that don't exist, but those you can kind of like catch up if you use the schema validator. It will tell you there's an error. We
That's
don't
right.
use that.
Yeah, and it's an iterative process, right? So I think, especially if you're learning how to do it, it's a great tool to help teach you how to do that. And again, like if we started off a long time ago working with smaller businesses where the websites weren't huge. ChatGPT and you iterating on it, validating, editing it, is maybe not a bad place to start if you have a relatively static website. It's when we get into like more complex or larger sites where there's changes going on to content that you really need to be thinking about, generating JSON LD off of a JavaScript or, working with a technology like ours, or again, a plugin that sort of works with the components of the website. Those are good options that you can have there.
And one last caution, because I've seen it many times, is with the address. So if there's an attribute that doesn't exist, you might be able to call it. But if the address is wrong, that can potentially create issues. Address or old address or phone numbers and whatnot.
Yep.
So use ChatGPT carefully. And I'm just looking to see if I missed anything. So just Ali's comments, schema markup is basically defining your content and help search engines understand it.
Yeah, and I just extend like it's not just search engines, it's going to be chat like AI platforms, ChatGPT, and then agents as well, but based on what Arviku has saying.
Well, I took a lot of notes. I'm going to come back to this recording and take some more notes. Marta's site is a great example on how to implement schema, so I recommend everyone to go visit. I believe you're pretty active on LinkedIn and you shared all the links. I believe we're also close to the time. So if there aren't any more questions, I just want to take one last moment to thank you again, Marta, for
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
being live now and for putting all the information that you've shared throughout the years. It made a difference for many businesses and at the end of the day for everyone, because we're doing SEO in the SEO space to provide people the best answer for a service or for a product. So we're helping Google in a sense.
Amazing. Well, we're happy. We want to teach the world how to do schema markup properly. So we'll keep producing content and share as much as we can to help people get that done.
Okay, and Kevin said I've been scanning blog posts on schemaapp.com and they're really good. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. You'll find a recording of this session at howaboutsmarketing.com. That being said, see you next time.
Thanks so much.